Good morning, and thanks for having me here, and thanks for coming to engage in the discussion about the future of transportation. My name is Chris Urmson. I work at Google. I am the technical lead for the self-driving car program there. I'm going to spend a few minutes this morning to talk to you a little bit about our project, why we do what we're doing, how it works, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion and Q&A after. When we started working on self-driving cars, it started about safety. If you think about the incredible loss of life in America, it's unbelievable. There's 33,000 people killed on our roads every year. This year it's likely going to be around 40,000 people. And that's a really hard number to understand. If you think about it as airplane crashes, it's the equivalent of a 737 falling out of the sky 5 days a week. We completely wouldn't accept that in air transportation. I don't know why we accept it on the ground. We sell cars like this. And what we get is this. And the reason why is that we're driving more and we're not building roads to support it. So between 1990 and 2010, 39% more vehicle miles traveled, 6% more road lanes. So we're fitting more stuff into just a little bit more space. And so it's getting worse. It's not like, when your grandparents talked about walking uphill both ways to and from school. The roads actually are getting worse. And all of this has an incredible human toll. So if you take the average commute, multiply it by workers in America, you get to about 6 billion minutes per day spent commuting in the US. If you convert that to lifetimes by dividing by the 37 million minutes that people are alive, it turns out that every day we're wasting 162 lives in traffic. Think about that for a minute. So there's an incredible opportunity. And then finally, there's people who don't have the privilege of sitting in traffic. People like Steve here, who's an incredibly capable individual, just happens to be blind. And what that means is for him, what should be a 30-minute commute turns into a 2-hour ordeal every day to get to work. For people who are in the baby boomer generation, who are starting to feel a little uncomfortable driving, or whose children are feeling uncomfortable about them driving, the difficult conversation about taking the keys away is coming. And for those people, their ability to get around in our society is going to be incredibly limited. And so this technology has the opportunity to improve all of these aspects. And so my team's mission is to improve people's lives by transforming mobility through this technology. I came to Google 7 years ago to help start the project. And when we started it, we were clear that we didn't want to be just another research project publishing papers. We wanted to figure out whether this technology could actually work. And so we set out with two objectives. The first was to drive 100,000 miles on public roads, and then the other was to drive 1,000 miles of interesting roads. And I don't know how many of you are engineers, but it turns out if you're an engineer, your job is to cheat. It's to solve a problem as easily and as quickly as possible. And so for the 100,000-mile challenge, we got our vehicles, we put them on the public roads, and we had them drive back and forward on the freeway at 70, 65 miles an hour. And we tore through that 100,000 miles pretty quickly, and we learned a lot from that. The other half of this challenge was to drive 1,000 miles of interesting roads. And the idea there was, let's really understand the breadth of the problem, not just driving on freeways, but the whole scope of it. And so then we can figure out what we should do. One of the really interesting bits of technology we developed was the ability for the car to very precisely understand where it is. Everyone has GPS, and that white box on the left is where GPS would be telling our car it is. And this would have been a bad day. The silver box is obviously where the car really was on the road. And what's happening is our cars are using what they see in the world and a map they had ahead of time and matching the two 10 to 20 times per second. And that allows them to understand where they are to better than about 4 inches anywhere that we have a map. And that allows them to drive safely on the road. After about a year and a half, we completed those two challenges and we said, this is great. We think this technology, it's clearly not ready yet. We drove those 1,000 miles of interesting roads, but we drove them once, and it wasn't perfect. We did the 100,000 miles, and we said, okay, this technology has a promise. Let's put some more effort into it, and let's push it forward. And so we said, based on all our experience, where's the easiest place to drive? Well, it turns out it's the freeway, because everybody's going in the same direction. They're all moving about the same speed, and people were never really intended to move at 70 miles per hour anyway, and so they make the roads wide, and they make them easy to operate on. So we pushed towards a vehicle that all it would do, you would drive it onto the freeway, put it in a lane, press a button, and then it would drive down that lane and keep going. And the technology looks something like this. So You would have a geometric understanding of the world here. The green thing on the right is a big truck. Purple thing on the left is a car. The car would move a little bit to give space around the truck. It understood other drivers' blind spots. So in this case, it saw the vehicle beside us, understood we were in the blind spot, slowed down, and then in a very unfortunately robotic kind of way, found itself in the blind spot of the next car and slowed down. But I didn't always slow down, but it's funnier this way. So we got the point the technology was pretty much working. And it took us about 2 years. And at this point, we said, OK, let's go and give it to people who don't work on the project, kind of other Google employees that do search or advertising or something, and let's see how they use it. Because it turns out if you work at Google and you're not working on teleportation, you're probably not trying hard enough. And so we were worried that with this audience, that if we gave them something that just drove down one lane of the freeway, they were just going to pan it and tell us how terrible it was. And it started out, kind of that way. We had one guy, turns out, drives a Porsche. He came in and he told us, "This is stupid. I have a Porsche. I just like gadgets. So I'm going to try this." And he took the car away for 5 days. And he came back and he said, "I get it. Turns out I'm a terrible driver. Turns out all those other people are terrible drivers too. You can't have it back." And we heard this over and over from people. We had 140-something people use it, and they all came back and said they loved it. And that, as someone trying to develop a product and a technology and bring it to market, that was great.